We have numerous documents showing that all factories that could be moved were sent over to Korea, and that's where I think that the Navy program went. We do have these consistent reports that they had a plant there, the NZ plant, and that they were working on atomic nuclear bomb there at the NZ plant.
Korea was the ideal place for such a project.
North Korea grew by 1940 to be the engine of Japan's war effort. It was one of the largest industrial areas in the world. It certainly was the largest concentration of high-tech industry and electro power in Asia at the time.
Power was a crucial factor in full-blown nuclear bomb manufacture. The Japanese, like the Americans, were discovering that uranium processing plants required as much power as a small city. The Manhattan Project had always been given as much power as it needed, and it seemed that in Korea, the Japanese project was catching up. As well as electricity, Korea had ample supplies of another vital resource, labor.
In the summer of 1945, they had to use people to dig tunnels where they were planning to put the machinery underground in anticipation of bombing raids. And so prisoners of war were used there, as were numerous unskilled workers taken from the countryside in Korea, as were Japanese students whose schools were shut down, and a whole host of other people were involved in digging these tunnels.
Japan could only hope their massive mobilization of labor would pay off, because this would certainly be their last chance. Then came August 6, 1945. America's huge investment in nuclear research paid off.
A short time ago, an American airplane dropped one bomb on Hiroshima and destroyed its usefulness to the enemy.
America had won a race they scarcely knew they were in. The loser, Professor Nishina, was mortified. He wrote this remarkable letter to his bomb team.
If President Truman's statement is true, the time has come for us, as the members of the project, to commit suicide by harakiri. I will tell you when to do it, when I come back from Hiroshima, so please await my return. US and British scientists have won a great victory against the Japanese scientists, the scientists of Building 49 at the weekend. It is nothing less than that the personality of US-British scientists was far superior to Japanese scientists.
Nishina's assistant, Kigoshi, who had left Tokyo after the firebombing, now returned, hoping to visit Nishina.
I had to walk a long way across the ruins that were burnt to the ground to get to the science labs. Professor Nishina was not around at that time. However, his secretary, Mrs. Yokoyama, suddenly told me that the professor wanted him and me to commit harakiri together. When I laughed out loud, she said, with a serious look on her face, that it was no laughing matter. The Professor Nishina was serious about it.
In the end, Nishina thought better of his plan. And soon, things took an even worse turn. President Truman ordered another atomic bomb strike, this time on the city of Nagasaki.
If they do not now accept our terms, they may expect a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth.
The military supervisor of Japan's bomb project went to examine the ruined cities firsthand.
I flew over Hiroshima and Nagasaki at low altitude.
広島と長崎こちらの飛行機でね上空を見てそれから
and saw that the results were devastating.
非常に大変な思いましたけれども
But it was the work of the enemy.
だからこちらもなるべく早くねこういうものを作らない
I saw that this weapon was horrible.
そういったことはですね非常に無差別攻撃といいますか
It worked well against the armies and the military bases,
ねこういうものは
but it was cruel to use it against cities.
軍隊ばかりいる艦船の、艦隊の集団だとかね軍事
Nonetheless, the first thing I thought of was that we had to strike back fast.
なものだなそんなことを思いましたしかし一番
Of course, I didn't know that the war was about to end.
向こうに越されたこちら
I
も
wanted us to have such a weapon ready as soon as possible.
できるだけ早くこういうものを作りたいなとそういうこと
But the task for the Japanese to perfect their atomic bomb was immense, and time was not on their side. The Japanese situation was desperate. Two major cities had been annihilated by America's atomic bombs. But even now, the Japanese Empire resisted defeat, searching for any way to stave off the inevitable. According to one report, they made one last-ditch effort. They conducted a nuclear test. Immediately after the war, David Snell, an American journalist at that time in the U.S. Army, had an extraordinary encounter in Korea with a Japanese intelligence officer who stated he was attached to Japan's atomic bomb program. He claimed to have been an eyewitness at the detonation of Japan's first atomic bomb.
Shortly after midnight of that day, a convoy of Japanese trucks moved from the mouth of the cave, past watchful sentries. The trucks wound through valleys, past sleeping farm villages. It was August, and frogs in the mud of terraced rice paddies sang in a still night. In the cool pre-dawn, Japanese scientists and engineers loaded Genzai Bakudan, the bomb, aboard a ship in Conan. Off the coast near an islet in the Sea of Japan, more frantic preparations were underway. All that day and night, ancient ships, junks, and fishing vessels moved into the anchorage. On August the 12th, a robot launch chugged through the ships at anchor and beached itself on the inlet. Its passenger was Genzai Bakudan. A clock ticked. The observers were 20 miles away. This waiting was difficult and strange to men who had worked relentlessly so long and who knew their job had been completed too late. The light in the east where Japan lay grew brighter. The moment the sun peeped over the sea, there was a burst of light at the anchorage, blinding the observers who wore welder's glasses. The ball of fire was estimated to be 1,000 yards in diameter. A multicolored cloud of vapors boiled towards the heavens, then mushroomed in the stratosphere.
Snell's story was published in 1946. It was reproduced around the world, but was soon lost in the fast-moving developments of the post-war years. No further backup of Snell's story emerged, but he was a respected journalist who went on to gain a reputation for his integrity.
I was able to find David Snell in Texas. He was a retired person at this time. And he told me, yes, it all happened. He said, exactly as I wrote it, I believed it. The man, the security agent was a high-level officer, and I believed him, most assuredly I believed him. He is a sterling gentleman, and I believed him.
If Snell's eyewitness was correct, Japan had all but caught up with the United States. But there is still a large gap between exploding a test device and successfully launching it against an enemy. And now, Japan was dealing not only with America, but with a declaration of war by the Soviet Union. Whatever the facts of the Korean test, it was already too late. Bombed to destruction, assailed on all sides by their enemies, Japan finally announced its surrender on August 14, 1945. The records of the Tokyo bomb project were burnt by the scientists themselves. The evidence from Korea simply disappeared. Soviet troops had fought their way across the border into what is now North Korea, site of Japan's alleged bomb factory and bomb test.
They came and took away machine parts from Hangnam's fertilizer factory, pipes, motors. They stole so many machine parts to bring back to Russia. I even saw them taking away a farmer's cow and loading it onto the plane.
Anything that was anything in terms of manufacturing, in terms of military equipment, they just picked up and took back with them. So if the Japanese had anything in North Korea, it's in my guess that it went to Russia and it went fast.
In Korea, the NZ plant in particular became a focus of Soviet interest.
Now, as a result of the highly secret nature of this particular plant, the Russians were very interested in it, and some of the people who worked there, 6 of the researchers who worked there, were initially taken away as war criminals by the Russians. 5 of them were convicted, and 1 of them was not, who was let go, and there's no explanation of why.
Once the Soviets were in control of Korea, access was denied to the rest of the world. The whole area where the NZ plant once stood and the island off Hangnam, where David Snell's eyewitness claimed to have watched a nuclear test, are now part of North Korea. They are still closed to outsiders. Meanwhile, the Americans, arriving in triumph in Tokyo, found that evidence of the nuclear project there had already been reduced to ashes. Even so, they took a close interest in the buildings.
Every day, I would go to the science lab, and one morning when I went, they were pulling down the walls. I heard all this noise coming from inside the campus grounds, and I wondered what was going on. When I went to see, they were cutting the big cyclotron into small pieces using a hydrogen burner.
Nishina protested strongly, but the cyclotron ended up in pieces in Tokyo Bay.
Well, it was explained as a mistake, but in truth, it was not a mistake. We found out something. We found out they were lying. We found out that there was much more going on that they hadn't told us about, including possibly we were getting whiffs already of Korea. And that was the reason that order from the War Department to destroy every single piece of equipment they had was given.
It is not hard to see why Japan's secret remained buried for so long. It was not in anyone's interest to reveal it. Even now, final confirmation is impossible. Any evidence not burnt by the Japanese themselves was destroyed by the Americans. The evidence from Korea, including the scientists, was annexed by the Russians. The Japanese were certainly not anxious to draw attention to their own atomic bomb project, and the Americans